Hi, welcome back to The Inner. Today I'm joined by Maia Nartoomid of Blue Star Rising. Maia, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Nelson.
It's wonderful to have you. If you could introduce yourself to the audience, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, it's a long story, but I'm not going to tell you all of it. I'll just be as brief as possible here. Um, my journey, I guess, in all this began when I was born, but isn't it for all of us? However, I'm just touching on some highlights here to give you an idea. When I was 4 months old, I made funny little noises at night, and my mother knew instinctively, she was always very instinctive, to take me outside and night sky. And I was born in Venezuela in South America because my father worked for an oil company there at the time. And so in the tropical skies, she takes me outside, and at 4 months old, I point to the heavens and say, star. And that began it, I guess you could say. My mother thought, I better write that down. And she didn't freak out. She didn't go and tell all the neighbors. She just said, oh, I better write that down. And so another instance would have been when I was 4 years old. And by then we lived in the Ozarks in Arkansas. My father had just really didn't want to work for he was an electrician, but he didn't want to work for oil companies anymore. He wanted to be out in nature. So he decided to do a dairy farm. So he bought himself a dairy farm in the Ozarks. And when I say dairy farm, I don't mean one of these big things that, does horrible things to cows. He had 5 cows. He hugged them. They followed him around like puppies, Obviously, he couldn't make a living that way, so sadly, it didn't last long. But while he was doing it, he had a good time. And so there I was in the Ozarks, nature surrounding me, and I was 4. This was 1955. Okay, there was no television on in my property. Town was a hour away. We'd go to the movies, maybe see a Western because my dad liked Westerns, or once in a while we'd see another kind of movie, never science fiction. So there was nothing in my space, even at a 4-year-old, to draw from. And yet I had an experience very vivid to me where I believe, well, I know it was astral travel, but I didn't know that then. I just called it a dream. I was flying through the air, and there in front of me, like in front of me here, this is my mountain here in Crestone, there was a mountain, but it wasn't an Arkansas mountain. It wasn't a Venezuela mountain. It was a desert mountain. And there was this big desert mountain, and I just went right inside. I mean, 1 minute I was not there, and in the other minute I was inside. And there were these beautiful people. They looked human, tall, and they had sort of white suits, or I say clothes on, and they treated me like I was one of them. And I felt I was. I was like, oh, hi, and we conversed just like I was an adult and everything. They showed me these boxes, computers, with lights on them and everything. And they told me what they did and certain things about them all. So when I came back, I said, oh, gosh, I had a really great dream. Let me draw you some pictures of what I saw. And so I took crayon on for some reason on napkins. I don't know why. And I drew, big baby pictures, but I drew pictures of what I saw. And the two that were most interesting were one, especially, I said, now this, and she typed she put the napkins in the typewriter, she typed what I said on it. I still have it. And I said, this is a clock controlled by the mind. Now, this is a 4-year-old, 1955, on a dairy farm in the Ozarks, no TV. And so the other one that was interesting, I said, this is a mountain with the measles. But when you look at the picture, it's dots on the mountain, like a grid, So to a 4-year-old, if they didn't tell me exactly what it was, which obviously they didn't like the other one, I just said, oh, looks like a mountain with the measles. So this is the kind of thing that started me off, you might say. But my mother was so incredible. She took it all in stride. She had a completely open mind. She didn't jump to conclusions. She didn't become a stage mother. She just, oh, okay, well, I'm going to document this. This is my child. It's my responsibility. I'm going to document it. And then one more incident to paint the picture. When I was 16, and I was in those days, they called it high school, but it was junior high school, the junior year of high school, not junior, but junior year of high school. And I put my hand on the door of the what do you call it, the cafeteria, which stood for a study hall, that you went and sat down, wait for the bell to ring. Well, my mother let me out of the car, and she always waited for me, not because she thought I was going to skip school, but because it was so difficult for me to go to school. I made good grades. I didn't get in trouble or anything. It just was like totally against my whole consciousness. And so she just waited, give me a little support, you know. I went and I put my hand on the door, and I got very clearly, it wasn't a voice, but it was an imprint that was so clear it might as well have been a voice. And it felt masculine, very gentle. And it said very gently, my birth name was Christine. Christine, if you go one more day, it will be dangerous. And it wasn't like, if you go one more day, it'll be dangerous. It wasn't like that. It was just very calm. So I wasn't afraid, but I turned around and I got back in the car, and my mother said, "What's wrong?" And I very calmly told her. And she looked at me, and I looked at her for all of maybe 30 seconds. And she said, "Let's go home." And I never went back. And 6 months later, I started my work. I started receiving, the first thing I did was I received, well, I was kind of depressed. Okay. I was like 18 by then, and, you know, or maybe 17, 18. And I didn't want to go back to school, but, you know, where was I going to fit in? You know, I was a teenager and I didn't know what to do. And so she thought, well, she came to me one day with a 17 magazine, and she said, they're having a contest for poetry writing or short story writing. She says, I know you like to write poems. I didn't a lot, but I wrote some, you know. And she said, why don't you enter this contest for a short story? I thought, well, okay. So I sat down to the typewriter, and I put my hand on the typewriter, ready to think, now, what do I want to write? Now, this was not automatic writing. Nobody took over my body or anything like that. But all of a sudden, I just knew this whole scene about a people living in Canada in an ancient time. I've never been to Canada. This is ancient. And it was after the continent had sunk in the Pacific. Well, I kind of knew that was Lemuria. I'd heard about it briefly, you know, somewhere, whatever, but barely knew about it. And the continent had sunk, and here were these people making their way. They'd survivors, and they called themselves the people of the gray moon because the skies were dusty still and gray, you know. This just came out of nowhere. I didn't read books like that. I didn't do anything. So I typed up 2 chapters, and I gave it to my mother. She read it and very calmly said, I don't think this is for 17 magazine. So it progressed from there. I kept writing. We were wondering, where is this coming from? And, you know, one thing led to another, and my mother was guided. She was in the mall one day, and she felt something, and she looked to her side, and there was this bookstall. There used to be lots of bookstalls because that's all we had in those days. And she went over, she just felt guided. You know, she stopped what she was doing. She walked over, and there was a book. It said, the Book of Mu by James Churchward, who was an archaeologist in the 1920s. We never heard of him, but she pulled out the book, she opened the book, and she went, oh my God, because in it, he had researched all over the world in ancient cultures. He even went to Tibet, you know, Mayan lands, Africa, all these different places. And he found these what he called vocables, that when you put them together, they made universal words. You know, you could see in all these different languages. And he had researched it. He felt that it was the vocables were addressing the first language of mankind, which came from Mu, which is Lemuria, but Mu is the actual name. And when my mother saw these vocables, she saw that many of them went together to make the names of my people and the cities and the towns of the people of the Great Moon. And it made sense. It put together, it made sense. So then we went, okay, what is this? And the only thing we knew about was we'd heard about Edgar Cayce, you know, he way back there. We'd heard about Edgar Cayce. So we got a few books on him, and we found out about the Akashic records. And we said, that must be what you're doing. So I could go on, but that's the way it began. Now, one more piece, and that is when I was writing away and doing, now that I started sciences, I started bringing through these sciences. Now, they were quantum science, but I didn't know the word quantum then, but that's what it was. It was universal science. And we were watching, this was in 1972, I believe, or 3 or 4, somewhere in there. And I think it was 2. And we were watching TV, and Edgar Mitchell was on. Then he was an astronaut, and he was getting ready to go to the moon. And he was the most accredited scientist at the time of all the astronauts. And he said when he was returned from the moon, he planned to give up being an astronaut, and he was going to create an institute for parapsychology. That's the only thing you could find in those days that matched mystical science, was parapsychology. And my mother said, well, let's write him. So I did. And I sent him Universe One, which is my little booklet of science that I'd written. So, of course, he went to the moon, he came back, he had to go into quarantine, got out of quarantine, and then he called. And my mother answered the phone, and he told her that when he got back, there were tons, he was a rock star in those days, the astronauts, the moon astronauts, and there was tons of mail for him. And he said he wasn't going to open anything he didn't know the person. He'd just leave that for his secretary, say, thank you very much in the end of it, But he saw my package, and he said his hand just was literally drawn to it. And he opened it up, and he read something. He said, this is genuine. He said, I want to meet Christine. Well, we were in San Antonio, conveniently, not that far from Houston, NASA. So he paid for my mother and I to, find a little place to stay and everything. And we drove up there, and the gates of NASA opened because he was still technically there. And we drove into NASA, and we went into this big room to wait for him. It was like Valhalla, a giant room with all these tables. And there was only a few astronauts in those days. So they had their pictures all around them. It was very impressive. And the door cracks open, and here's this nice little guy. In those days, he had a little red goatee and little red hair, and he had his coffee cup. And he comes in and sits down. And that began our communication with Mitchell. And he had me come back and forth several times. But finally, on the last visit, he knelt in front of me. I'll never forget this. My mother was sitting on one side. I was here. He knelt down, and he said, I was 20, I don't know, 23, 24, whatever then. And he knelt down in front of me and said, Christine, you're the most exciting thing I've come across so far. He said, but he said, I realize now that studying you and your work would be a lifetime. And I have my lifetime. I'm establishing my research center, and I ain't going there because I've got this other thing. But he wanted to give me respect and to tell me this was for real, but he couldn't do it. But I wasn't that disappointed. I almost felt like it was destined to be that way. I needed that to say, hey, this is real, this is for real. And so I just kept going, and here I am today. So that's awesome. That's the shortest version I could give you.
That's amazing. So you mentioned a few things during that we'll go back to later, but one of the things that I loved about when I was listening to your channel and listening to some of your stories is your relationship with Thoth. How did that really develop for you? Where did that begin?
Yeah, okay. Well, in order to tell that story, we have to begin with the star kindred. In those days, I called them ultra terrestrials, but I changed that. That's what I was given at the time. But that changed when, I don't know, a few years ago, people started calling other kinds of beings ultra terrestrials. And I thought, well, that's not good. So they suggested star kindred. So now I say star kindred, inner earth kindred, and I'll talk about them. But we started with the star kindred, and that's the story into itself, because not long after I started with all this, when I was just before I'd made contact with Edgar Mitchell, or maybe just after, I'm not sure, I started having visitations from these tall beings again, human-like, but they came into my room, and these were men. Most of them were men that I saw before too. I don't know why, but they just happened to be. Anyway, so I'm sleeping at night, and I wake up, and in just as real as anything, there's a 7'6'5", 7 foot tall man standing in my room. What are you going to do? I went, that's what I did, and then instantly, and they would disappear, but in front of my eyes, and they said they communicated with me. And they told me they mean me no harm, and that my higher soul self had given them permission to be with me and to help me. I had health problems all my life. I still do. But I think they, helped me to live as long as I have, which I'm 75 now. And so they, would give me treatments and very easeful things, just be there for me. And so I said, well, that's fine. Just don't pay attention to me when I scream. And they said, well, that's a little difficult because it actually hurts us. The way we're coming into the field, and I don't think I even knew about, there wasn't any Star Trek, and I think that came a little later, but the way they were coming into the field, their cellular rearrangement, if I screamed, kind of, the sound kind of messed them up. So one time I woke up and I sat up in bed and watched this. There were some balloons. They were floating. They floated through one wall and then gradually floated, and then they went through the other wall. And when I asked them in the morning, what was the balloons about? And they said, we're trying to think of something so harmless, but that shouldn't be there and could go through a wall. And I didn't scream. So they were trying to train me, And so then the really cool thing was, on 2 occasions, my mother and I saw them together, because she was old enough to be my grandmother. So she was born, and I was her only child. She was born the year the Wright brothers flew Kitty Hawk, 1904. And yet, when my physician Ramul appeared in her room in front of her, she'd go, "Oh, hi." It didn't faze her. So one time he came to her and he said, "Would you please get up and go into your daughter's room?" So she got up and walked into my room, and you could feel the energies of these beings. You'd wake up immediately. It wasn't bad energy. It was just, it was there. So I woke up, I looked around, and here's my little mother, because we're both short, walking in, this big, tall dude is walking in behind her. And of course, I've lost it completely. But and another time, there was one other time when we saw them together. So that went on for a while, as for several years. And they told me that I had a mentor. They called him my benefactor, actually. And they said, "You have a benefactor." And they didn't tell me who he was, but they said he's a very high being. And he's the one guiding all of this. But you're not able to communicate with him yet, but you will be. Well, about 10 years after they told me that, 10 years, it happened. And I started communicating. And that being identified himself as Thoth. So I had to go to the library in those days and look him up. And so that's how that came about. And of course, that was 1977 by the time he arrived in my conscious realm. And so then the Star Kindred kind of faded away. They didn't, their job was done, and he was in place. However, then there's the inner earth beings. Again, they're even closer related to us, because the Star Kindred are related to us, but the inner earth kindred are even closer, because they are developed from the many races and civilizations on the surface of the earth that couldn't make it here. Then they, like the Noah's Ark, they chose the ones to come in, not dragged them in. They came in of free will to create this, this ark inside the planet, because it wasn't just about their personal survival. It was about the survival of the genetics, of the genetic races and the beings on the planet. And so that's what's going on in the inner earth. And it was every planet that is alive. It has what Thoth calls a planetary soul. It's different from a human soul, but it's a viable being, creates a viable being. And every one that is, they call it that a planet. And as the planet reaches viability, there's a spin of its electromagnetic field in a certain way. And it's almost like opening the top of one of the Coke bottles. I don't know if they still have them these days. You go, and the fizz comes up and it just spins the liquid inside. Well, there's a spin involved. And as it does that, it creates a slightly removed dimension. And in that dimension, there's the hollow with the central sun, the central atoma, as he calls it, of the planet. And this creates the whole, viability of a true living planet. And so, but not all of them are as sophisticatedly set up, because when it becomes viable, it starts creating just nature and stuff like it does on the surface. But the difference with this is that when things started going a little sideways, even back in Lemuria and Atlantis, when things weren't going right, they invited some of those beings inside the earth. And what they did was they terraformed it, the Star Kindred, and created more viability that they could live in there in a more practical manner. And so that's what they do. So I started communicating with them around 1980. However, I realized when they told me somewhere around that period of time, actually, it might have even been before 1980. I think it was in the mid 70s, that I had an alternate life in there, which is, it's not unusual. We're multidimensional beings, okay? So I happen to have an alternate life in the Earth, had been there before Maya Christine had ever been born. And her name was, I thought it was Michael. I didn't pronounce it right at first. It's Mikala. But I remembered then, and this was later that I remembered this, that when I was 4 again, I named my doll Mikala. I was trying to say Mikala. So, my relationship with the inner earth kindred has been there for a long time. And more recently, it's especially grown back again. There's more to say about that, but I'll stop here. But anyway, that's how Thoth became involved in all of these other aspects. But Thoth is my man. He's the overlight. He's the frequency that makes sure that nothing negative comes in, or just somebody wandering in. It's kind of like Facebook. You never know who's going to show up, Instead, he's got this envelope of light so that the right frequencies are there,
Yeah. So is your Thoth the same as the Thoth that we read about in the Emerald Tablets or the Hermetica? Is this the same, I guess you would say,
Yes.
Oversoul that we're dealing with?
Yes, it is. Now, he tells me that Thoth, he says, is a title. And there were other more minor Thoths and times that they decided to name themselves that or whatever. But the real Thoth, he had 2 incarnations as the Thoth. The first, he came from the Blue Star Rigel in the ship, here to Atlantis and whatever. And that was Thoth Muzurut. And then he decided, when he left as that incarnation, he decided to literally incarnate into the earth with star genetics. He's still a high luminary, but he wanted to mix with the earthen genetics. And that was Thoth Racemus of Afra, of the altar place. And the Thoth Racemus was the one that carried, let's see, Thoth Muzurud brought the emerald tablets with him. It was a code. It was an encoding, not tablets that you hold in your hand, an encoding. Thoth Racemus created the emerald table, which is like a computer. It's a table and then you have these tablets that fit in like sections of a computer, you see. And I have a whole video on that, by the way. And that's how that developed. Now, I get what I get. I'm not trying to tell people that this is the gospel truth. I'm just saying this is my experience, and it's been my experience all my life, and I have to share it. I mean, if there were 2 people I was sharing it with, I would be sharing it just as much vigor as I am now, because that's what I do, But you can make up your own mind about all of this. And it doesn't always agree with what other people say. That's the life, right? Yeah. And I'm not going to worry about that. It does agree with some, and it doesn't agree with others. There's some people that say, oh my God, he's the Anunnaki, he's the Niki, he's the bad guy. And it's like, no. I was raised by this guy. He is a very spiritual, beautiful being. He speaks of the Christic consciousness and the Buddha consciousness, and this is an illumined master being. Yeah. So that's the bottom line of that.
I'd actually consider you more credible, just because it comes from personal experience, than I would a scholar who simply studied and did their best intellectually to put it together. Like, a lot of what you said are things that I myself have experienced before and after meeting the same Thoth.
Yeah.
Like, he also told me that it's a title that many people carried that was kind of like the title given to, I guess the closest parallel I could give it is like Sorcerer Supreme from Marvel.
Yeah.
Where it's like the Lord of Mysteries would oftentimes carry that title, Thoth. So it was kind of whoever was the greatest mystic at the time would carry that title.
He says it means the divine breath. It's the breath. That's why my video on it says what is it called? Opa, the divine breath, and the emerald tablets, because it kind of goes together. When you go to my Blue Star Rising, which incidentally, the Blue Star Rising channel is shared with Michael Dunn, And we've done some shows together on it. We do some things separately. Mostly he has other things to do, so he isn't as prolific as I am because he's got another life, and this is mine. but his work is really beautiful. But anyway, we share that channel. And I have, of course, my own website, thenewestar.org.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you mentioned, I was reading some of your articles, you mentioned about this current incarnation of Thoth for like the modern time. And now he was like I guess you could say like a hybrid of all the pure races on the planet.
Are you talking about Thothami?
Possibly.
Yeah, because he has an embodiment as Thothami, which is kind of like what's his name? The one that wanders around on the planet. I can't think of his name now. You know, that Yogananda talks about, and all of the ones that he Babaji, that's it. Yeah. He's kind of, I don't mean he's Babaji, but I mean in the sense that he just appears and he's to here, and Thoth is in the inner earth, but Ami is on the surface. Now Ami looks more, it really looks more like Indian, Eastern Indian look about him, whereas Thoth is blonde and tall. And I said, why? And when I first saw him, it was like, well, wait a minute, I thought you were Egyptian. And he said, no. He explained, he's not Egyptian, he was in Egypt, but so he talks about that perspective. But anyway, Ami looks more Indian. I haven't had a lot of connection with him. I just know that he's there, and he is part of the Thothic soul.
Okay. So if you could, going back to something you mentioned earlier, Lemuria, or the land of Mu, talk about that, because that's been an area that in certain spheres are very popular, but for most people, they've never heard of it before. So if you could kind of give us a crash course on Lemuria, which I believe is the older civilization in comparison to Atlantis.
Yes, indeed it is. Well, Lemuria goes, first of all, Lemuria Mu. Lemuria is, as I understand it from his history, because I'm going by history here, Madame Blavatsky coined Lemuria, but she said it was something where the lemurs were in Madagascar or something, and somebody grabbed that and attached it to Mu. So there's a confusion there. But I will usually say Lemuria, which is really Mu, because I use both of them because a lot of people know Lemuria and they don't never heard of Mu. But Mu is the actual name of the continent. And if you look back into the Hawaiian text, the ancient Hawaiian text, they verified that. They say Hawaii was part of the people, the land of Mu, or the people of Mu, or something like that. So anyway, let's see where we're going. Oh, Lemuria. Okay, so Mu. Before it was Mu, it's a point. If you look at Mauna Loa on the Big Island in the whole, there is that that island, the Big Island, is the point on the planet that is 94. Oh gosh, I'm bad with math. 94 point something on the planet. Every planet at that particular point on the planet, and I don't have the math right, but I think it's 94 point something. If you look at Saturn or Mars, they have the Saturn is the big red spot there, and this is something that the author of the book of Face on Mars, can't think, Richard Hoagland, wrote about. Well, Thoth takes it and says that that point in Hawaii, because that's where that point is on the Earth, he calls it the royal point, ROIL, and he says the energies from the central sun of Toma roil up to that point on the planet. And when everything's ready to change from what Thoth calls a world system 1 to a world system 2, and we go into what he calls this planet the new Earth star, that point is going to that's where it comes up right there. So Mu is the point where all of this energy comes back and forth on the planet. And so if you go back far enough, Thoth speaks about the lotus reality. Now he's using the word metaphorically here, but he calls it the lotus because when the souls from the blue star Rigel and Orion originally came to this sphere, it was just a rocks and soil. It wasn't a planet yet. It wasn't alive. They created an envelope of beingness above it, we could call it, and they put a thread down, see the lotus with the stem, into the central sonatoma, because it had just been, it was forming at the time. And that was part of the whole enlivening energy of this particular sphere. So they existed in the lotus at first. And then through a lot of things, I will shortcut here, they came down the stem, like Jack and the Beanstalk. They came down the stem, and where did they land? Well, the point that they chose had to be the royal point of the planet. So it was where the Hawaiian Islands is now, Mu was then. And that's what populated the first beginnings of Mu. That was a long time ago. So you have so many thousands and thousands of years before Mu finally broke up and, you know, ended itself. And so Mu went through a lot of different stages of life, and it had made its mistakes and things happened. And there's the whole thing about Melchizedek and the heaven houses, and how from Venus, you know, Lord Melchizedek, who was incidentally Thoth, same soul, came down and established the heaven houses to try to redirect the genetic frequencies, because they were becoming off center. And we're talking about all races now, but that energy in all performances on the planet was collectively deteriorating. And so you know, they were establishing this frequency to uplift it again already that long ago. And all kinds of things happened with that I won't go into, but that was Mu. Now, as Mu started its final phases, before it started its final phases, Atlantis started being settled, and there were movement going on in Atlantis. But the big difference between Mu and Atlantis, they both had a lot of beautiful beings in them, and a lot of wonderful things happened. And there were things in Mu that weren't so good. I mean, that, you know, all those thousands of years with human beings, guess what could happen? You know, what's the worst that could happen? And things happen. But all in all, Mu was a very, very sacred, and they held to their doctrines as best they could through thick and thin. Okay. Atlantis started out that way, but became the rebellious child. And when they were the ones that created the time tsunami, not all of them, but the ones that did, that, you know, changed a lot of things on this planet. And I have videos on that. So I'm not doing a make bad on Atlantis, but I'm just saying that certain souls in Atlantis, and there's a reason that I give in my videos connected to something else. They, you know, certain souls in Atlantis, they went astray big time. And we find a lot of those Atlantean souls in positions of power today. You know, and because a lot of them just think they're not, a lot of them, they just think, well, we're superior. Hey, we're superior, so we get to rule the planet. That's the mindset, not of all Atlanteans, but of those particular ones that are connected to this time tsunami and connected to the whole, you know, thing. So I think most of us who are acquiring minds and spirits and hearts have had lives in both places. I know I have, Mu and Atlantis.
So when it comes to the those, let's just say, more negative Atlanteans that survive, still in power today somewhat, their influence at the very least is still functioning today, would you connect those to the other branch of Jedi known as the Shimsu Sets?
I know about the Jedi. I mean, I know about the Jedi from the ancient standpoint in Egypt, as I
That's
said
what I mean.
Okay, but I don't know the correlation of the Jedi in the movies, you know, so you're gonna have to explain it to me.
So I was same Jedi, spelled Djedi, where there was pretty much two factions. They had the Shimsu Heru or Shimsu Horus and the Shimsu Seths, positive and
Okay.
negative branches of the same
Okay.
warrior mystics.
Well, that would have come later than Thoth, so that's why I'm not really familiar with it, because his original Jedi, you know, came before that, and of course things start deteriorating after that. But yes, I could say that there is definitely a correlation with that. I mean, from what you're telling me and the feelings that I'm receiving on that. Yeah.
Okay. So currently there's been a lot of talk about the age of Aquarius or the age of Hapi. What can you say is, I guess you could say, the essence of the age of Aquarius?
Well, you know, Thoth has not really talked about that, but from his perspective, I'm receiving that he doesn't like a lot of boxes with these things from the standpoint of astrology. Now, astrology is good. It does a lot of great things. But Thoth speaks about astrology beyond astrology. In other words, dimensional astrology.
Yeah.
That goes into dimensional fields and understanding the time shifts and the dimension, the galaxies we can't see, and all of this kind of stuff. So if you add all of that into the equation, the age of Aquarius, it's not that it doesn't exist, but it doesn't have the power we give it, you know, because as we are moving now through preparing to enter, and this is a whole nother topic here, from a world system 1 to a world system 2. World system 1 is entropy, things break up, decay, die, to a world of syntropy, things go into the center. They move toward the center. They rejuvenate as they move to they may change forms, but they don't like change forms like that. They change forms through, you know, because they're going into the center to change forms. They're not breaking down to change forms. So that is the, you know, moving from a world system 1 to a world system 2. And as we do that, we're expanding the whole field of our genesis. And Phil speaks of it as a regenesis program. And so when you're moving through regenesis, the age of Aquarius doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Now, I'm just saying that, you know, if we're moving through this whole property of change, we're changing, literally, he says that we will, the whole consciousness of the earth, plus the codes of the physical matter that choose to receive that energy, will go back into the star sun of Rigel and create a new level of experience for the planet Earth. We take up the planetary genius from the center of the Earth. We take it with us. So it's not just a completely new world. It's a new Earth. All the programs of light that are good about us, that we created with the heartfelt beingness, will come with us. But we'll go back home into Rigel. Now, what about all the other star people that say, oh, well, I'm from the Pleiades, I'm from, well, you know, there's a lot of star systems that are here, all good and beautiful and wonderful, just like, you know, New York City, you know, they come from a lot of places, but who created New York City? That doesn't make them the most important. It just says they created it. Well, so we're talking about the blue star Rigel in this instance. And as those worlds move back into that frame of being, the star beings that are here from other worlds, they may come along and say, hey, this is a good idea. Let's help them get over there, you know? And some of them will say, well, my job's done here. I'm going to go back to Arctic, or what is it called? Arcturus or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Can't think of the name. So anyway, that's the story that I've been given. And the interesting thing about this, Nelson, and I just really need to stress this, you know, I'm only a human being, so I can make mistakes. And when I receive, I'm a translator. I don't call myself, I'm certainly not a medium. I don't call it channeling. Thoth encourages me to call it source translation. And I'm sure many channels are source translators, but that's the term he's using. And so I can make mistakes. I'm a lens. But that said, when I look at the material that I've written for 57 plus years, and I go through something and I'll pick up something I wrote in 1975 or 85 or 95, and I look and I go, oh my God, that fits exactly with what he just told me in 2024. But I can't remember what I wrote back. You know, I don't remember this. So it all just fits together. The only things that I see are missing from the earlier material is my ability to get the bigger picture. I didn't have the bigger picture. So I was going with, oh, this is interesting. File it away, write more. Oh, that's interesting. File it away. And now, you know, with what's happening in the world today, I go back and look at that. I think, this is perfect. This is for 2024. And I wrote it in 74, you know, but in 74, I didn't get that picture. So I took it for what I thought it was and I filed it away, you know. So that's why now, in this latter period of my life, I'm making so many videos, because I'm bringing forward the material that's so germane for now. And of course, then I'm commenting on it from the perspective of 24, but I'm also reading it and sharing it and working with it.
I like that. So in your personal life, I guess, what does mysticism or spirituality look like for you on a regular basis? More so, how is that practiced by you personally?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Well, I happen to have, and have been unhealthy all my life, and I've taken really good care of myself. But I was born that way. I guess it's genetic or whatever. I have a scoliosis of the spine. I was born with that, and I have, colonic problems, and now more than ever, chronic fatigue, which is actually myalgic encephalomyelitis, and it's pretty bad. You wouldn't know. I'm sitting here talking to you and everything, but it's not good. So I have to deal with that. I'm not a meditator. I tried it. It just doesn't work for me. I don't have practices. I try to be, this is it. I try to be a good person. I'm very self-reflective. I see my faults and I work on them. And I eat good food and drink good water. And I show up. Thoth has said he said to me not long ago, I guess it's been 3 years now, he said, I say to all light bearers, fear not, rise up. You were born to do this. So, to me, to you, to anybody who's listening, fear not, rise up. You were born to do this because this is the unique period of time on the planet that's never been on this planet before. We go through cycles. This is different because we're preparing for this transition. And so back to my life, that's what I'm doing. He said, show up. He said, light bearers are not perfect. They're people, they're not perfect, but they show up. So you make a mistake, get up, you dust yourself off. He said, gosh, I'm sorry about that. I hope I learned my lesson. You come back and you show up again. You show up through lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. And he said, that's what counts. You do the best you can and you show up. So that's what I'm telling you I do. I show up. But I don't have any practices in spiritual. Not that I'm putting that down. That's wonderful. I just can't do that. But I live so much in the envelope of Thoth and doing this work. It's kind of like a meditation. It's touching this spiritual essence because I feel it in my being while I'm doing it. That's not it. It's not an excuse. It's just saying that's how it is for me.
I like that. That's a good answer. So just because I know the question is going to be in my comment section, how would you recommend getting in touch with Thoth if someone wanted to communicate with him themselves?
I don't know. I don't know how I did it. He came to me. I didn't go to him. Well, just getting in touch with your inner heart-centered being and calling upon it. For instance, I'm going to give this little story. So in 1982, 83, somewhere in there, someone contacted me and they said they knew their friend had like a 4 or 5-year-old little girl was in the hospital. I don't remember what she had, but she was dying. The doctors were said, we don't think she's going to make it through the night. This is long before COVID or anything like that. And they just said, can Thoth help him? And I thought, wow, I don't know, and I asked him and he said, we will see what we can do. But he said, you're going to need to ask everyone that cares about this little girl to ask her higher soul self to be open to receive what I'm going to share with her. All the love energy saying, please, be open to this. So they meditated on that. They did that. The next morning, they called me and said she was sitting up. She sat up in bed and said she was hungry. And apparently she was well. I haven't kept track of her all these years. That was many years ago. And I had another case where a little boy, friend of mine, he was very young too. He couldn't talk. I mean, he could, kind of, but he was like nearly 5 and he would sound like he was 9 months old, He had his senses. He was perfectly sharp. He just couldn't talk. It's a particular, thing that some kids get. And the doctor said, well, he's never going to talk very much at all. We can give him a little training, he can, when he's 40, he may be able to utter a few sentences. Well, my friend came to me and I went to, this was before I was totally connected with Thoth. I was with the Star Kindred. And I said, you treat me all the time. Can you do something for this little boy? And I said, we'll see what we can do. And so then my friend said the next time, a few weeks later, she visited her sister who had the little boy, where she didn't dare talk to her sister about any of this, or she certainly didn't talk to the little boy. He runs up to her and says, and she could kind of understand him. He would do sign language and whatever. And he said, what he said in essence, a man came into my room the other night, and he had something over his mouth, and he had a baseball bat, but he wasn't hurting me. He was holding it over my body. That's what they did. They had this thing over their mouth, and this long tube that they would run over my body. I don't know what the thing over the mouth was. It's so unusual. And this little boy, mimicked it and showed her. Well, in 4 or 5 months later, he started talking, and he talked, and he talked, and he talked. So then I said, well, how could you do that for me? And they said, well, because you're not 4 years old anymore. And he said, the babies, they're more open to receive the kind of healing. I forgot why I got off this. You asked me about something. What did you ask me about? I can't remember now. No. But that was my answer for it.
I don't remember.
I'm sorry.
I do have another question. This might be my last question, at least that I have prepared somewhat.
Yeah.
In conversation with the I guess on the topic of like the star seeds, which you call the star kindred, there have been many stances, and I'm curious what yours is concerning their accessibility or presence in the world today. I've heard some people believe that they're physical entities like us, and they're actually moving around on the planet in this third dimensional field. And others have the belief that they're parallel to us. They're just on a higher dimension than us. So most people won't see them even if they're standing in front, because they're operating from a higher plane. So what's kind of your understanding of that whole thing?
Well, really, it's both, because they are operating on a higher frequency, but they can make themselves appear to you, and especially the Venusians. There's a lot of Venusians running around, and they're mixed with us. You could have Venusian blood. I know I do. Well, I say no. It was a rather dramatic story. I won't tell it, but around that was kind of made, giving me some proof about it. But it's not like it's exceptional. A lot of people have Venusian blood. So they're us and we're them in a way. But the pure Venusians, they're around a lot, but they can do that, see, because everybody's on another frequency. You and I are on another frequency, but it's so minute. We can still see and communicate with each other. But with other beings from other worlds, because Venus, we say, oh, there's nobody on Venus. It's a hot rock, with boiling water. Well, that's from our perspective. That's from our dimension. Even when we put a satellite over there, whatever, it's coming from our dimension. Mm-hmm. If we changed into the other dimension, like Voloski did, I think his name was Voloski. No, not Voloski. I'm sorry. That's Adamski. Adamski. Have you ever read his books? I did years ago. And, he said the Venusians took him to Venus. And now people say, oh, he made that up because look at Venus. But no, they really took him to Venus. And it looks pretty much like this. So they're here. And some of the bad ones are here too. But, there's this whole thing about, the Anunnaki and the lizard people and all of this stuff. And yes, the Anunnaki existed. Yes, they dabbled in our genetics. But we've made them rock stars. I mean, they were just this much of our history. And all these light beings have been here, and they guide us and protect us and keep us. But, we make our own mistakes, just like kids in life. You can't protect your children against everything. They got to learn their lessons. Well, that's what we did when we just opened the door and let the Anunnaki in, vibrationally speaking. But that's a small part of the history. Mm-hmm. Same with the lizard beings. I mean, yeah, there's a few lizards hanging around. Some of them are not so bad. Some of them are bad. The grays are really much worse. But all of that, it's on a very narrow bandwidth. It's like highly magnetic. So you feel it, oh, the lizards, oh, the grays. But they're a very narrow bandwidth. And we have a vast broadband system here, and the star kindred, the lumens, the angelics, however you want to call, all of these beings are helping us to develop that, to move past this little teeny tiny bandwidth, get our sights on the star, and like I did, star, and focus on that and get out of that frequency zone that we're so concentrating on. Because every time we separate ourselves from another human being, or we do a make wrong on somebody, and yes, there's bad things going on. We have to be aware of that. I'm not saying we live in a world of rainbows and unicorns, but when we emotionally get attached to something like that, we get into that magnetic bandwidth, and then they can have a meal because we have dropped into that frequency. That's why it's so important to uplift ourselves and keep our hearts centered. You don't have to be perfect to do it. You just have to experience love, true energy love in your life. And the more you experience it, the more it comes to you. Give and you shall receive.
Yeah. So what species would you say that Thoth is actually of? Is he reptilian? Is he Lyran? Is he some other thing?
He's from the blue star. He's from the blue star Rigel in Orion. He's the kindred that come from that. And the Venusians technically are too, because they, like Earth, Thoth calls Venus the guardian planet of Earth, because the beings from both Earth and Venus are the only sets of the planets in the solar system here that come from Rigel. So, but Rigel is a big star too. There are a lot of different planets involved, like, for instance, Osiris, the true real Osiris comes from Orion, and he's black. There's a lot of different, the thing with them though is that a lot of the different worlds, they like it that we're so different. We have so many different people and races and things. It's just that we need to get along better. But I mean, this is cool to them because their worlds, and they don't do this on purpose, but they usually have one sort of stripe on this planet and then another stripe here, and they communicate and share, but it's different. And they like it that and it's intended that we're a mix, we're a rainbow mix here. But the problem is we just don't get it yet, how to combine those energies in the proper way, intellectually, spiritually, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. That was fantastic. So that's pretty much all the questions I had that I got while doing the interview. Is there anything that you'd like to leave with the audience? Any last words, any final statements, bits of wisdom you'd like to share?
Gosh, I would suggest that you go to the Blue Star Rising website, not website, YouTube channel, and see what, because I've got so many videos there and they keep coming. I have my Substack too. If you go to my website, youarestar.org, you will find all of that, links to there, all those places. And there's you'll just find everything you need there. That's about me and my work and what I do with those. Yeah, I guess that's all I can say right now.
That's awesome. Thank you again. If you could release a blessing for the audience.
Okay. Well, let me see. Oh, if I'd known in advance, I would have brought up one of those, but let's just go free fall here. Well, Thoth is reminding me of something he told me years ago, and the term was come to the stable. And what that meant from his reality spectrum, he was putting it into, a metaphorical term for us, was that, if you look at the story of Yeshua and how there was no room at the inn and he had to be birthed in a little stable, with the hay and the horses and everything. It's not a metaphorical story. I believe it really happened, but everything in his life had a meaning. Probably does in all of our lives, but in those master beings, it's especially laid out. So when he's saying, come to the stable, he's saying, come to the simplicity of the heart. Sure, we can delve into all these sciences and fancy stuff. That is great. But first you have to come to the stable. Humility, the presence of nature, and the birthing process that comes out of, placing yourself as a child, is that babe in the manger. And starting from there, you can rebirth yourself anytime you want to by just thinking about that. When I was born, I was a baby and I was in the manger. I want to go back there for a moment. I want to touch that feeling that I had in my heart of purity. And I want to expand it and bring it out into who I am now. It's like rebirthing yourself. So that's what I leave you with.
That's awesome. Thank you again for joining me. It's been an honor having you on. So that concludes this episode of The Inner. Until next time, y'all be blessed.